Hey, real life groups. Great to see you again and welcome to another real life study. I'm Pastor Brent and this is Jody Shelton. And you've heard from her before on some of these videos. And so we're going to do something kind of different today. And we've come together to just kind of have an interaction on this topic that we want to deal with called boundaries and margins. Now, we'll be the first to say we are not the poster children for boundaries and margins necessarily.
No, not at all.
This is something we're still learning in our own lives and in ministry and in our families and all areas, really, of trying to learn what are the proper boundaries and margin. Now, if you're sitting in your group like a lot of us, we might be thinking, why are we talking about boundaries and margins? It doesn't sound like a very spiritual topic, does it?
No, it doesn't.
It sounds like, well, this is something like maybe Dr. Phil we would be watching on and talking about. But the reality is, the Bible has a lot to say about boundaries and margins.
Yeah.
And living in the year and the days that we live, boundaries and margins are becoming more and more important, not just for, let's say, survival and getting all that we need to get done, but just survival mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, in every way. And so we just felt it was good to take a study to really just kind of have a conversation about this. We were talking about the reality that when we were in school, they would talk about computers and, you know, kind of give us this picture that when we grow up and computers will be running the world, we'll hardly have to work.
Yeah, won't have to hardly work, it'll take over everything. We won't have any paperwork anymore. It'll just save all of our problems. And we'll have so much more time to do stuff.
So much more time. Yeah. We're like, you know, our parents, you know, we watched them work the 40-hour work week or more, you know. And everybody said, oh, it'll be at least down to 20, 25-hour work weeks because computers are going to take care of everything for us.
We wouldn't have to do anything.
Yeah, technology was going to save us.
Yeah.
But the reality is...
that didn't happen.
That did not happen. In fact, totally opposite has happened.
Complete opposite.
Yeah. In fact, technology has come and, in a sense, taken over our lives, pushing us, pressing us to accomplish way more oftentimes than what we're even capable of doing.
Yeah, well, because we also went from, you know, when electricity was invented and then the cell phone and the computers, all that stuff, we went from, you know, only doing stuff until the sun went down to now we have 24 hours a day. We can do all kinds of technology. And and people can reach us on our cell phones no matter where we are and any time of the day. So we went from having a little bit of space to no space at all.
No space at all, you know. And here's the funny thing. I think you had mentioned to me, you know, just the idea of the most developed countries have the least amount of margin.
Yeah, exactly.
Here we are thinking we're the cutting edge, we're the ones moving ahead.
Yeah, and we're the ones going crazy too.
We are.
I remember going to Haiti a number of years ago, like almost 30 years ago now, staying up in the mountains, and you know, when the sun went down, everyone went to bed.
Yeah.
And the sun got up, and they were at the town well, you know, so they had a lot more time to just chill and just be, you know, but we don't have that anymore, not in our culture.
No, it's a 24/7 culture.
Yeah.
And, you know, many of you are watching this. You're maybe one of those shift guys that are working 12-hour shifts during the night, then swing shift, then more, you know, your schedule is all over the place.
Yeah.
And to try and have what we might say a normal life can be very difficult.
Yeah, you really have to be intentional to have margin.
Very good. Yeah, I think that's a key word, intentionality, of just realizing that this isn't something that's just going to happen, especially in our culture.
Right.
You're going to have to be intentional about it.
Absolutely.
And I think those of you that are listening to us, that might be one of the key things you walk away from this whole talk together is the idea of being intentional about our time, being intentional about how we schedule our lives, being intentional. I've often had it told me that you can pretty much tell what is important to somebody by looking at their calendar and their checkbook.
Yes. Yeah, and also if you don't plan for something, you know, it's just going to go away from you. It's the time or money, whatever it is, it's just going to get away from you. The same thing is true when we're talking about margin. If you don't plan for that margin in your life, it's going to be gone.
Yeah, it will be.
Yeah.
I am probably one of the classic examples of always thinking, well, I'll just make time for that when it comes up, you know?
Me too.
We'll find some money for that when it comes up. But the
Yeah.
reality is we got to plan.
Right.
We've got to schedule ourselves. Well, here's the interesting thing. Like we said at the start, we might think this isn't a very biblical or spiritual topic, but the reality is the Bible has a lot to say about this.
It really does.
In fact, right from the very beginning, in the story of creation, as we hear in Genesis 1 and 2 how God created the earth, I mean, he did something day 1 and he said it was good. You know, he created the light, and then day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. And then we come to day 7 and we kind of just blow it off.
Yeah.
We just kind of blow it off. But let me read for you from Genesis chapter 2 and verse 2. The writer writes, he says, "By the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. And God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating what he had done." Interesting thing, the word for rest there is that Hebrew word Shabbat.
Yeah.
It's the word where we get our term Sabbath from, if you've heard of the term Sabbath. The Jews look at Saturday as their Sabbath, and it comes from this, the 7th day. It was the day that God rested. Now, here's the funny thing, and I'll ask Jody as our in-house theologian right now, this deep question. Yeah. Did God need to rest? Does God need to rest?
No.
No, he doesn't,
He
does he?
doesn't need to, no.
God doesn't need to rest.
Right.
But he took the opportunity to rest.
Right.
I was reading
Perhaps to set an example?
Yeah, you're right on. You must have read my commentary that I read. No, the reality was, yeah, I was just reading a commentary before we came on here. And the whole idea, one author was saying, was the idea of why so much emphasis is put on this whole idea of rest. In fact, the word's used several times in just those couple verses. When God had finished, that's the same word. It means he's come to the end of it. He's come to rest. But the reality is, as this commentator was saying, was that in many ways, this is following, just as as the author has gone into quite in depth about how God made us in his image. Oh. And so all this emphasis on God, we're made in God's image, and then he comes to this point and says, and God rested. So what this author was saying, this was in a specifically emphasized passage of reminding us as created beings in the image of God that part of who we are is rest. Yeah. Giving ourselves margin, as we might call it, yeah. You know, in this day and age.
I think it's interesting, too, that you said it when you're reading those verses that he said he blessed that day.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, obviously the rest of creation, he said it was very good, but he blessed the 7th day, too. It was definitely something not to just skip over. Yeah. You know, so...
Well, and he said he blessed it, and he called it holy.
Yeah.
And the term holy, it doesn't mean, you know, something super religious. It means it was a day separated from all the rest. Right. Right. Where man was to rest just as God did. Like we said, God didn't need to rest. His whole point was to give us that example. Yeah. And what's funny, we might say, well, that's an Old Testament thing. That's an Old Testament thing. But you're the first one to say, that's not an Old Testament thing, is it? Right. No. It's a New Testament thing, too.
Jesus, yeah. Jesus was our example in the New Testament. There's a number of times we see in the book of Mark, chapter 1, verse 35, where Jesus got up early and he went to a solitary place and he prayed. And again in Luke 5:16, it says that he often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. So Jesus himself, who is God in the flesh, if he needed to rest, you know, and go to a solitary place and be alone by himself and pray to the Father, how much more, you know, he was perfect without sin, and, how much more so do we need it, you know, with our imperfections, you know, we need that rest too. Yeah. So again, he set the example for us to follow as being made in his image, so.
Oh, so much so. Yeah. You know, I've been to how many pastors' conferences and retreats where they've talked about that, you know, because I'll be honest, I think pastors are some of the worst at this because we feel like, okay, we are called to God's ministry. It's so valuable. We can't waste any time. There's so many souls to save. There's so many hurts to heal. All this time, and we just push. And You look just at Jesus. Did he push, 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 push? He did totally the opposite.
Right.
Here was God in the flesh, and you would think, okay, God's come to this earth for this opportunity in this moment. You would think, okay, he's going to try to hit every place, touch everybody, and accomplish
And
his
never
great plan.
sleep ever.
And
right?
never sleep. He didn't even need to.
Yeah, right. He was God.
He was God. But yet he submitted himself to full humanity as well.
Yeah.
And so he understood that point of, there are times you need to get away.
Right.
There are times to build in that margin.
Yeah, and and even with lay people too, I know it's an issue with pastors, but
Oh
also
my,
with,
I'm not just saying
with,
us,
with
yeah.
lay people too, just the whole idea of, well, yeah, you got to just be so effective, and you're gifted in this area, you should be doing this and this and this, but, just because it's a good thing doesn't mean it's the right thing for you to do, and I know we're going to get to that later, a little bit later, I
Yeah.
think, about when to say yes and when to say no.
Yeah.
But definitely, you feel like you should always be going just because you're gifted in this area and just never stop, because, yeah, but it's not always true. You
No.
have to take time to breathe or you're going to burn yourself out.
No, so true. When we talked a few weeks ago about this, I thought you gave an amazing example. I think maybe your author had done that, the book you read, and we'll show these books that we've gotten some of this information from at the end. But just the idea of even a book, when you look at a book,
Oh, yeah.
there's margin around the edges.
Yep.
There's margin at the top, there's margin at the front, there's margins here and there. And, there's spaces between the letters and words so that you can read it.
Right.
But imagine if it was just all just crammed in there, taking up all the whole
Yeah.
page.
No margin at all, just complete letters all the way across,
Yeah.
That would be very hard to look at.
Very hard.
You
And
couldn't. It would
you
be-
couldn't.
yeah.
It'd be super hard
Yeah.
to see that. So let's just talk very practically. What are some of the areas that we need to build margin in?
Well, in this, is it okay if I show
Yeah,
this now?
go
This
right
is the
ahead.
book that I read called Margin by Dr. Richard Swenson, MD. And he talks in here about 4 different areas of margin.
Okay.
And emotional, physical, time, and finances. So
Okay.
we can kind of talk a little bit about each of
Well,
those.
and I think each of those are going to play out a little different for each person, but the basic principle is in our emotional lives.
Yeah.
I always used to kid with our daughters, especially. Girls seem to be more emotional than men at times. But we
Yeah.
always said we need to make sure that their emotional, what we call tank, was filled up.
Yes, their emotional love tank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that they would operate and be who they were best to be.
Right.
And that idea is kind of the same here in our lives. What are we doing for ourselves emotionally
Right.
to keep us healthy?
Right. Well, because back to the illustration of the book with no margins in it, we say that would be very hard to look at, but in our own lives, we do it all the time. We run
Yeah.
ourselves ragged, and that leads to major stress.
Yeah.
So that's one of the big emotional things there, which can lead to other,
Oh, my, yeah.
issues too, mental
Well,
health issues, and
we
you
see
name
that
it.
in our world today.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I'm one of the first ones to say, I struggle emotionally at times.
Oh, yeah.
And a
Me
lot
too.
of that I find is just, man, I am going at 100 miles an hour for way too long.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to,
Our brains can't take that.
our brains
No,
haven't been built
they
to
need
take that.
the rest.
We need
Yeah.
that rest. So the second one you said is physical.
Yeah, what he really emphasized was not getting enough sleep, exercise, and also poor nutrition.
Yep.
Those 3 things are really vital.
Well, in our world again,
Yeah.
fast food at every corner,
Yeah.
and we're taking the energy drinks constantly just to keep up.
Right.
Yeah,
and well, no, I can push it just a little bit longer so I can get this done. Oh, maybe I'm not going to get as much sleep, but at least I
You'll
got
be
it
all right.
done. And
I'll
yeah,
catch up later.
Yeah, catch up later, but
It doesn't happen.
in reality we don't. And
Several years ago, I had a good pastor friend of mine that I was we were serving in the same church together, and I've heard this elsewhere too, but he told me, he said, one of the most spiritual things you can do sometimes is rest.
yeah.
And
Take a nap.
take a nap. He said, because just my own background, I came from a very strong holiness Pentecostal background of you just pray, 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 pray. And I was out, and I believe in that, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, spiritual isn't just praying, it's resting.
Right. Well, because you have to, in order to be emotionally and mentally healthy, sometimes you have to take care of your body too.
You have to take care of your
The two really
body.
go hand in hand.
Yeah.
The emotional and physical health really are intertwined
They
quite
are.
a bit.
You're the nurse.
Yes,
You know.
I am.
You
I do know.
You know that.
Yes.
The third one you mentioned was time.
Yes, that's a rough one, isn't it?
That is. I often heard it said, don't let your schedule run you. You run your schedule.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do we do that?
You know what? I just know one of the things I had heard on the radio a while back. I think we mentioned it in our talk the other day. I heard this 10-10-10 principle.
Okay.
And someone was saying that when you get asked to do a particular ministry, that you should think about how, before you answer, how it's going to affect you 10 minutes from now. And the answer might be like, oh yeah, of course I want to do it.
Yeah.
But then you think, well, how would I feel about that 10 weeks from now? And it might be like, I don't know. And then think about how it would affect you 10 months from now. And maybe you need to think a little bit more about this decision instead of rushing into it.
Yeah.
Or another thing I've heard is that if it's going to be where someone wants a yes or an answer right now, that the answer has to be no. And because you have to take time to pray for it. Because sometimes in the moment we're excited and we want to please someone, but you have to really think about that stuff. You have to guard your times. There's a lot of good things out there, but they're not always the best thing, you know. And I know that one thing that he talked about in this book is that everyone needs personal time, family time, sharing time like with your friends, and God time.
Yeah.
And if any of those are out of whack, it's not going to be good. I mean, we need that.
Right. We need a balanced life.
Yeah.
And I think with the whole time scheduling things is to realize that life is going to be full of interruptions.
Oh, absolutely.
But I've almost come to the point of realizing, in many ways, our life is so scheduled, we don't have opportunity for interruptions.
Right.
And when an interruption does happen, like a car breaks down or a kid's sick,
right.
boom.
Right. Right. But yet God calls us to be ready to be used by him, right? So he
That's what
wants
he
us
said.
to be available.
He said, be hospitable.
Right.
Who knows, you might be entertaining angels, he said, in the New Testament.
Right. So maybe that means that we need to kind of like plan for, those types of interruptions and not, completely schedule out every single moment of our day, but allow for extra time so that we can be sensitive to those interruptions and not be annoyed by them, but realize that those are awesome opportunities that God has given us. And we're supposed to be looking for those, right?
Oh, my, yeah. Well, the fourth one you mentioned was the area of finances.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness. We think time is bad for a lot of us.
This is a rough one.
For a lot of us, it's our finances in our Western culture of, achieving the American dream and keeping up with the Joneses. I mean, we make all those comments, cliche comments, but the reality is a lot of us, we're living like that. We're squeezing every little ounce out of every penny we make, and there's no extra. Kind of back again to the whole idea, the car breaks down. It's a major issue because we haven't saved money for any car repairs.
Right.
Kids sick, gotta get a doctor bill.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, our finance just collapse on us because we're living so tight.
Right.
So what do we do about that?
Well, I know, and I really think that the American dream is really counter against the Bible. Don't you think? I mean, it's just, for one thing, it's all about me. It's all about what can I do, what can I accumulate. But God wants us to have financial margins so that we can be able to give the money that's not even ours. It's His money, after all, to be able to give that money to people who are in need. And He knows that when we have that heart that we're ready to give, instead of hoarding it in, He is going to give us those opportunities to be able to share that money with other people. But if He knows that we're just going to keep hoarding it in or keep going into debt, then we miss out on the blessing then too.
Oh, totally. I was just reading in our story series this last week, when God called Abraham and said, and you will be a blessing to all the nations. Yeah. And I think, I think in many ways that's the call of the church. You're to be a blessing to the nations. How can we be a blessing if we're just constantly just looking after ourselves, just barely scraping by?
Right.
And a lot of people say, well, it's a issue about income level. Not most of the time. No,
it's a hard issue.
It's a hard issue. It's a priority issue. And I think just with the way our culture is, this is an issue that
Yeah,
have to face
it's
over and
really,
over.
you know, I've, since reading this book, because he mentioned this in here too, is that whole idea of contentment. And if
Yeah.
you think about it, contentment is very anti-American.
Yeah.
Because we are not taught to be content in any
Oh,
of
I
these
know.
areas, you
Yeah.
know. It's always about what can I get
Yeah.
now, you
Get
know,
more,
and
get more.
get more, get more, get more. And so, yeah, that's
Yeah.
a big, big thing to learn.
Yeah. So here's the crazy thing. When we take margin out of our life, one of the key things that we're hurting is our relationships.
Yeah, God calls us, I mean, I believe God created us for relationship.
Yep.
You know, not just with himself, but also with other people. You know, we hear that all the time, the vertical relationship with him and the horizontal relationship with other people. But when we are so stressed out in all those areas that we just mentioned, the last thing we're going to want to do is to invest in those
Oh, my,
relationships. Or, you know, we're going to be around people, but we might not be very pleasant to
Right,
be around,
right,
you know?
right.
Our stresses have, and our expectations and our pressures have increased while our social supports have decreased.
Yes.
You know, that's a big thing
Yeah.
that has happened.
Yeah.
So,
So I think that's one of the key factors that the enemy is using
absolutely.
to destroy us,
Right.
is literally take away that relationship
Yeah.
tool
Yeah.
that God made us for. He made us for a relationship.
Yeah.
He told Adam, it's not good for you to be alone.
Yeah. Exactly.
Eve.
And so what does the enemy want to do? He wants to isolate you.
He wants to isolate us.
Or
He
make you
wants
so
us-
busy that you don't
Yeah.
have time for people.
And how does he isolate us? By bringing friction between us.
Yeah.
You know, that's why I think many of our homes today, we are so stressed out. There's no wonder there's no love
Absolutely.
between a husband and wife,
Yeah.
between a father and a son or a daughter.
Right.
It's because we are so pushed to the limits.
Yeah.
But yet, when Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment? What did he say?
Love
Love
God,
God.
and love one another.
And love one another.
Yeah. Yeah.
He said, and so what does the enemy do? Well, I'm going to come right at that.
Yeah.
So we're going so fast, 1,000,000 miles an hour. Our kids are in so many things. We're in so many things.
Mm-hmm.
We're, you know, quote unquote, having fun with all
Right.
our entertainment and all of our fun.
Right.
But all of a sudden, we don't have time for our small group anymore. All of a time, we don't have time for church anymore.
Right.
We don't have time for our Christian friends or any friends
Right.
anymore.
And you know, you mentioned our kids, we're teaching our kids the same thing.
That we are.
We are leading by example, and not in a good way.
Yeah.
You know, we're teaching them to live without margin, you know,
Yep.
and it's just like spinning and spinning out of craziness, you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And, you know, I mentioned to you before that, you know, I believe, like, for me, you know, I'm a mother and I work full-time outside of the home. And not to in any way, you know, say that when a guy works full-time out of the home, it's different, but in a way it is, because I feel like when a woman works outside of the home and has a family, that it's like you have two full-time jobs, because, you know, you come home from work and then you have your other job at home.
Yeah.
And you're, you know, managing the household, the dinners, the laundry, the cleaning, the grocery shopping, the whatever, you know, the carpooling. It's a lot, you know,
Oh, yeah.
and it's like, it can go crazy. And so then when you add in, you know, 2, 3, 4 kids that each are involved in, you know, different things, it could just spin out
Oh, my,
of craziness really fast.
Yeah.
And so I guess, you know, and I'm definitely not saying that I got this right or that I have this right, but, you know, I guess, you know, if there's young parents listening out there, I would just encourage you to really think about what you're having your kids get involved in, you know, because you don't want to teach them this crazy marginless lifestyle. And
Yeah.
remember the value of just play and free time.
Yeah,
You know, we've
giving
really
kids
gotten
time
away
to
from
be
that.
kids.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let them
Yeah.
be kids.
Well, I'll tell you, Jody, you're sitting next to what could have been the next Wayne Gretzky. Because
Wow, I didn't know that.
You didn't.
No.
I loved hockey. And growing up in northern Minnesota, I mean, that literally was God. And loved playing hockey. But one thing my parents drew the line in the sand was they did not let me play organized hockey. Because most of the tournaments were all on the weekends.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was a pastor's kid, so that kind of plays into it too. But I had many pastor kid friends that were hockey players too.
Yeah.
But my parents, I remember sitting me down and saying, you know what, there's a lot of reasons why we're not doing this. But one of the key ones is that it's going to take too much of your time, and you need to be a kid and enjoy this family while you can.
Right. And let's face it, most of these kids are not going to be professional athletes.
Yeah.
You know what? And a
Yeah.
lot of them, I've seen it so many times, end up getting burnt out before they even reach high school.
Right.
Let alone
Right.
college or after,
Right.
So,
And
yeah.
you know, and I'm not putting down sport.
Right.
I mean,
No. And it's not just sports. It's
no,
also
it's
music and other
it's
things too.
Clubs. It's
Yeah.
all this kind of stuff that we can just push our kids in.
Right.
But the reality is, I think we need to use wisdom
Yeah.
to know how much is too much, and kind of put that cap on things.
Yeah, and don't let the culture push you so much,
Yeah.
Be willing to take, perspective from what God is asking you to do and not just what everyone else around you is doing. I
Yeah.
know that's so hard.
Oh,
it really
is.
And again, I have
Yeah.
not gotten this right on many occasions.
Yeah.
But I guess, just with older kids now, I realize the value of that. And,
Yeah.
I probably would have maybe not done quite so much.
Yeah, yeah.
At times.
No, we live and learn along the way,
yeah.
and so that's why we're not condemning anybody or anything
Not at all.
in that
No.
sense.
Yeah.
But just to realize that, probably when most people look back, it's not all the stuff that we think we're going to remember. It's going to be the little things.
Yeah,
that
it
mean
really
the
is.
most to us in our families and in
Yeah.
our Christian experience. So bottom line is, to have margin in our life, we have to put up some boundaries.
Yeah.
And boundaries aren't always easy to put up.
No.
Depending on our personalities. Some of us are people pleasers.
Yeah.
Others of us are ones that have a hard time saying no to anybody or anything.
Yeah.
We love to do and be. But the
Right.
reality is, along the way, we got to be willing to say no to some things.
Right. Right.
I was thinking about this today. The reality is, when you look at the Old Testament specifically, and the laws that God gave to the children of Israel, they were in a sense boundaries.
Yeah.
Some of them, they probably were like, oh, I can't believe God did that to us. Others are like, oh, I get that.
Yeah.
But why did God put those boundaries around the people?
Right.
It was for their good and for his glory. And to realize in our own life, there are times when we need to put some boundaries in our life
Yeah.
to keep that margin level. I often use an illustration, especially with baseball players. Imagine yourself out on a baseball field where there's no lines.
That would be, a little crazy.
Could you really play baseball?
No.
Not really.
Yeah.
There's inbounds and out of bounds.
Yeah.
There's a home run fence. There's staying in the line between the bases for a reason.
Yeah.
Because that's what makes the game happen and be enjoyable.
Right. Right.
And I would say deep down in each of our hearts as adults, we desire boundaries.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because we are made that way. We're not infinite beings. We're finite human beings
Yeah.
that need some boundaries. And so what we need to consider are boundaries in our relationships.
Yeah.
Are there some people in our life that, rather than encouraging and developing us, are pulling us in the wrong directions?
Right.
Do we need boundaries in our workplace? Are we just taking on way more than we can ever handle?
Right.
And forcing ourselves, like we talked earlier, to margin with no margin emotionally
Yeah.
in our life.
Yeah.
And there are so many areas we could go to, but the big thing about boundaries is saying yes to some things and no to other things.
Right. Right.
And for a lot of us, and I'll be the first to say it, it's hard to say no to some things. Especially
is.
you're like, that looks so good.
Yeah.
But like you said earlier, it's probably not the best.
Right. Right. And again, like I know I said this earlier too, that prayer has to be a big part of it. And
Yeah.
if they're not willing to wait for a response, then you have to say no.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's hard, you
Yeah.
know, but they'll get over it.
Yeah, yeah.
They will, and they'll find someone else, you
Yeah.
know. So.
Yep, totally.
Or if they're willing to wait for you to pray about it, then maybe you will say yes
Yeah.
down the road. But.
Yep.
But yeah.
No, I think like you had some good advice earlier. Too often we're so quick to just say yes to everything.
Yeah.
Without thinking about it, without praying about it, with giving it time. Very rarely are there any things that we have to decide today. Back to the whole relationship thing.
Yeah.
We need relationships to help keep us in balance.
Right. Yeah.
Because
absolutely.
left to ourselves,
It'll fall apart.
we are. I don't know about you, Joe, but we got through a lot
I
of
know, we
things,
did, right?
in this time together. And I hope this was beneficial to those of you listening, just to hear our conversation on this topic. And I encourage you in your discussion together tonight, just be real with each other. This truly is an area that in our day and age we struggle with. even as Christians. And it's all right to struggle, but let's struggle together and find some ways that we encourage each other so that our lives might be more glorifying to God and that we might accomplish more for what God's called us to. So thanks so much for listening to us, and have a great time in your discussion together tonight.
Bye.
Bye.